All right, hello everyone. Thank you for joining the National Institute on Aging's Training and Career Development team today for a webinar on the NIA K22 Career Transition Award Beyond the K99. My name is Emily Krebs and I'll be your moderator this afternoon. Next slide. In a moment, I'll introduce you to our speakers who will provide an overview of NIA's K22 Career Transition Award and how it compares to the K99 R00. After the presentation, we'll have a moderated Q&A session, so please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A function in Zoom at any time during the presentation. This webinar also will have closed captions enabled for anyone who would like to view them during the session. Today's presentation will be archived on the NIA website and available for future reference. And we hope that you will share your feedback with us about today's event by filling out a short SurveyMonkey questionnaire at the end of the session. We'll share the link to the survey and some other helpful resources in the chat box throughout the event. And if you haven't already done so, we hope that you'll join our listserv to stay in touch about training and career development programs and opportunities from NIA. Next slide. As I mentioned, my name is Emily Krebs, and I'm a Senior Project Director at Palladium Partners. It's my pleasure to be your moderator this afternoon and to introduce you to today's featured speakers. Dr. Jamie Lavig is a program officer with the NIA Office of Strategic Extramural Programs. As a program officer, Jamie helps manage communication with NIA's emerging researchers about training and career development opportunities. She also supports new initiative development and program evaluation. Dr. Saroj Regmi is also a program officer with the NIA Office of Strategic Extramural Programs. In his current role, Saroj provides guidance, administers funding, and offers networking assistance for small businesses to accelerate Alzheimer's disease and aging research. He also advises early career scientists on the K22 Career Transition Award program and the READY program. As a reminder, please submit any questions you have during the presentation using the Zoom Q&A function. And with that, I'm delighted to turn it over to Jamie to begin the presentation on our next slide.
All right, thank you so much, Emily. I am excited to be here today to talk to you all about the K22 as well as the K99 as transition awards at NIA. And I'll start with sort of a big picture question of why should you seek career development funding from the NIA or the NIH? So career development awards or K awards provide funding for protected research time and allow you to continue developing your skill sets. These awards can also foster early independence as you pursue a faculty career, and they can be really great for attracting additional funding or research support. So there are a broad range of career development or K awards available from the NIA, and today we're going to focus on two of these, the K22 and the K99, which are both transition awards that are aimed at postdocs. So what is a K99 or R00 award? This is the one you may be more familiar with. This is a very popular transition award. Among the career development awards, this is the one at NIA that garners the greatest number of applications. And the point of this award is to create a mentored transition from the faculty or from the postdoctoral to the faculty phase. So the award provides two phases. There's up to 2 years of postdoctoral funding during the K99 phase, and then you make your transition to a faculty position and receive up to 3 years of funding in the R00 phase. And importantly, that transition from K99 to R00 is not automatic. You do have to submit an R00 transition application, and the NIA is going to want to review the faculty position that you've got. So what about a K22? This one is a little less well known. So not every institute at the NIH supports a K22, but the NIA does. So this is also a transition award that you apply to as a postdoc. However, this award does not have a mentored or postdoctoral phase. So if you apply for the K22 and you're successful, what you'll actually receive is an approval letter. And with that approval letter, you then have up to 12 months to start a faculty position. And once you're in that faculty position, you'll activate the K22 award. And then that provides you 3 years of faculty level funding. Once again, this activation step is not automatic, and you would need to support an activation application to the NIA, and we would want to make sure that your faculty position is sort of satisfactory for the goals of the K22 program. So let's compare these two side by side. So one of the big points of difference is in the eligibility, and I'll go into a little more detail about the eligibility of K99 versus K22 in a moment. But then the major structural difference is in these phases of funding. So like I said, this K99 is going to provide you two separate phases of funding in the postdoctoral and the faculty phase, whereas the K22 is going to just only give you that approval letter for your postdoctoral phase with no postdoctoral funding present, and then it's going to kick in at the faculty phase. So let's dig into some of these elements in a little bit more detail. So first of all, the eligibility for the K99 and the K22. So both of these awards are meant for folks who are still in a postdoctoral level mentored position. So you can't already be an independent faculty and apply for these awards. However, that doesn't mean that you have to have a job title that literally says postdoc. So as long as you're doing mentored research in someone else's lab, as long as you don't, you're not eligible to apply for your own independent funding, you can be eligible for these awards. So that might include job titles like postdoc, but it could also include certain research scientist positions or instructor positions. For both of these awards, they are postdoctoral awards, so you do need to have a doctorate degree, either a Ph.D. or an MD or a similar clinical doctorate degree. And in terms of eligibility timeline, they are quite different. So the K99 has a pretty limited eligibility timeline of only up to 4 years of postdoctoral research experience, whereas the K22 has a much more open timeline. You can have between 2 and 8 years of postdoctoral research experience. And that's really related to the fact that the K22 doesn't provide that postdoctoral training phase. So this one is really meant to get you directly into that next faculty position without any additional postdoctoral research time. They also differ in terms of citizenship requirements. So the K22 is similar to many other career development awards in that you are required to be a US citizen or a US permanent resident at the time that the award begins. However, for the K99, this is open to US citizens and permanent residents, as well as individuals who are doing their research in the US on a more temporary visa status. So the K99 is more limited in timeline, but more open in terms of citizenship requirements. All right, so once you've successfully gotten your K99 or K22, what kind of support will they give you? So they do differ at this point as well. So as I mentioned, the K22 is not going to provide any funding at that postdoctoral phase, whereas the K99 will fund your salary at up to $75,000 a year, and it will also provide up to $25,000 a year in research costs in that postdoctoral phase, which is a 1 to 2 year phase. Then at the junior faculty phase, the K99 can provide a total cost of up to $249,000. And it's up to you then how you want to distribute that between your salary and your research budget. And then coming out of that $249,000 will also be indirect costs that go directly to your R00 institution. The K22, on the other hand, is going to provide a set salary of up to $100,000 per year, and then set research costs for up to $50,000 per year. And the indirect costs going to your university are also specified at 8%. So at the faculty stage, overall, the K99 R00 is going to provide you more total research funds. All right, and so there are several different K99 and R00 awards supported by the NIA. So I want to just make sure you're aware of these different awards. We have a single K22 that we fund, and that is a specific NIA K22. And then for the K99, we participate in the parent K99, which is a sort of pan-NIH award. And we also participate in several other K99s that are more specific. So these other 4 K99s are all targeted at diverse populations. So they're only available to postdocs who are members of a group that's underrepresented in the biomedical sciences. And they each have a different scientific focus. So we have a couple of them that are focused on Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. We have one that's focused more broadly on neuroscience. And then we have the Mosaic, which is a really interesting award that, once again, it's targeted at diverse populations, and it comes with a cohort element. So folks who receive the Mosaic undergo career development training in a sort of cohort-based model. And this award is really for folks who are putting in some effort towards enhancing diversity and equity in the biomedical sciences. Once you've decided which of these awards you want to apply to, you'll want to start thinking about your timeline of preparing your application. So all career development awards, including the K22 and the K99, have 3 application cycles per year. So that means there are 3 due dates per year in February, June, and then October. And then once you submit your application, like let's say you were going to submit it for this upcoming cycle in October, it does take several months before your application undergoes review. And then several months after that before it kind of gets final approval, assuming you're successful, and so that you can start your award. Then if you aren't successful in that first round, you are able to submit a resubmission, and the resubmission due dates are about a month later than the initial submission due dates. So it is a long timeline, and you do want to be planning ahead, especially as you're thinking about your faculty transition. So we've kind of laid out the different timelines of the 2 awards here, so you can try to figure out which one is the best fit for you. So in this example, let's imagine that you are going to apply for this upcoming October due date for either the K22 or the K99. So for both of these awards, if you apply this fall and you're submitting an initial submission, your application is going to get reviewed this winter. And then assuming that you were successful for the K22, next summer you would receive that approval letter. And you would then start a 12-month clock. And within those 12 months, you would need to start your faculty job and initiate that K22. So the K22 is a good option for somebody who's looking at going on the faculty job market this year, or somebody who thinks that they will be starting a faculty job sometime between next summer and summer 2024. Meanwhile, the K99, assuming you applied at the same time, you underwent review and were successful, what will happen there is that in next summer, summer 23, you would get awarded the K99 Postdoctoral phase. And then you'll hold that K99 phase for 1 to 2 years of additional postdoctoral research. And so you'll be wanting to start your faculty job, not in summer 23, but no earlier than summer 24 and all the way up to summer 2025. So the K99 is going to be a good option for somebody who's maybe not quite ready to go on the job market this year, or who's maybe going to make sort of a soft run at the job market this year, and you're not expecting to really start that next job until late 2024 or 2025. All right, and one thing that we get a lot of questions about is the 4-year K99 eligibility window. So I want to make sure everybody knows that this eligibility limit applies to both initial submissions and resubmissions. So make sure that you apply early so that you have time to get in a potential resubmission before that 4-year eligibility limit hits in. And also be aware that this eligibility clock starts when you start your first postdoc. It's not when you receive your PhD. So if you had a big gap between receiving your PhD and starting your first postdoc, for instance, if you were waiting for visa approval before you could do work in the United States, that gap of time does not count as postdoctoral research. There are a variety of extensions available. We had some COVID-19 extensions in effect. So if you hit your 4 years of postdoctoral experience this year in 2022, you're able to receive an extension so that you can apply up through the October-November 2022 due dates. However, if your normal 4-year eligibility ends with this upcoming October-November due dates or later, there are no extensions available, and you shouldn't be counting on those COVID-19 extensions coming in. The NIH does provide a 1-year extension of this 4-year clock for anyone who's had a child born during the postdoc. So if that's your case, go ahead and reach out to my office and just let us know your child's birth date, and we'll issue you an extension letter. Additionally, you can get extensions essentially for any time that you've spent not doing postdoctoral research. So if you've had time off due to medical leave, family leave, perhaps a visa renewal delay, maybe time spent doing clinical work and not doing research, all of those would allow you to extend that clock. And if you think one of those might apply to you, just reach out to us and we can get you that extension letter so that you can take advantage of your full 4-year window. And then finally, before I hand you off to Saroj, who's going to go into some tips about applications, I do just want to talk a little bit about the NIA itself and what kind of research we support. So the NIA is divided into 4 scientific divisions, and all 4 scientific divisions do support both the K99 and the K22. So when you send us in your aims looking for some feedback, we're going to send it around to one of these 4 scientific divisions to give you feedback. And so that includes the Division of Aging Biology, which is really interested in the basic biology of aging as well as preventive strategies. There's also the Division of Behavioral and Social Research, which is interested in individual behavioral processes, as well as societal level influences on the aging process and on the health of older adults. We also have the Division of Geriatrics and Clinical Gerontology. So this is our division that looks closely at how we care for aging adults and how we care for diseases related to age. So they support a lot of clinical research or research focused on the caregiving process. And then we have the Division of Neuroscience, which is broadly interested in the aging brain. And then they, of course, also have a very special focus on Alzheimer's disease. And then finally, just to think ahead, in case any of you in the audience do end up receiving a K99 or a K22, we want to point out that that transition to the independent phase is not automatic, and you are going to need to apply for that transition. And so we have a process for how you put in that transition application. You can read a lot about it on our websites, but importantly, you're going to want that transition application to come in at least 2 months prior to your start date of your R00 or your K22. And we highly recommend that before you sign an offer letter, you reach out to your personal program officer on your K99 or your K22 so that they can take a look at that offer letter and both make sure that it's a good competitive offer and make sure that it meets all of the requirements for either the R00 or the K22. All right, and so with that, I'm going to hand things off to Saroj to give you some tips for a successful application.
Thank you, Jamie, for that nice overview. So I'd like to provide you guys with some tips on how to draft a successful application. A major take-home message for you guys should be that NIA training team is available for you. We're happy to discuss your specific aims and provide you with feedback. We do, however, ask that you do so at least 2 months before the due date. And we can also help you find the right funding opportunity for you. So please do not hesitate to reach out to us via email at niatraining@mail.nih.gov. Next slide. A really useful tool at your disposal is the Nih Reporter. It's a database that you can use to search for previously funded projects. It's really nifty if you want to know, if something in your area has been previously funded by NIA in the past. The database contains all NIH-supported research, and it's updated on a weekly basis. The other great tool for you is the sample NIA applications, K99 applications. So NIA has curated a sample application wherein you'll find the original submission that was not funded and a second submission that was in fact funded. So you'll be able to compare the summary statements and also applications and get an idea of reviewer comments. And so these links will be provided to you. Next slide. Another nifty, useful tool is the SF424 application guide. This is a really great resource. You should use this guide if you have any questions about the submission process. You'll be able to do a keyword search on the document, which is what I do when I'm providing advice on some of the funding opportunities. And you'll be able to understand, the application questions and how to fill. The annotated application forms are also available, which lays out how the application form looks like and what each question means. And both the links will also be available to you on this PowerPoint. Next slide. So, an important advice is, it's important that you think about your career, development plan. These awards are called career development awards for that reason. So research plan is really important, but so is the career development aspect of it, as well as thinking carefully about the panel of advisors. You and your postdoc advisor should both explain your plans to transition to independence. And this becomes especially critical for K99 because it is a mentored career transition award as opposed to the K22, which is not mentored. You also need to describe both the postdoctoral and independent portions of your research plan. And as it is highlighted here, apply early, allow time for resubmissions. Next slide. So start early, read the funding opportunity announcement and make sure you understand all the requirements of the funding opportunity. Talk to your university to learn about, the equipment you'll have access to, about the facilities and all the resources. Don't forget to obtain letters of support from collaborators. This is especially important given the very collaborative nature of modern science. You'll also need letters of recommendation from your mentors. In case of K22, you will not submit a letter of support from your mentor, but only from your collaborator, given that it's a non-mentored position. I cannot reiterate it enough. Give yourself enough time to submit the application. Don't wait till the last moment. Follow the application guide, the SF424. Also remember the Orsid Id requirement. So basically, every applicant will be required to provide their Orsid ID. These are unique digital identifiers to distinguish individual investigators. And these are maintained by a nonprofit called Orsid, and they are universally used internationally as well. So it's really important that you sign up for Orsid ID before applying. And finally, review the electronic submission information and the process so you really understand the process well on how to apply. Next slide. So these are the review criteria for both the awards that the reviewers will use to assign you a score for your application. So the first part is the candidate. What is the potential for potential for independence based on your prior research and training experience? So, they want to look at your potential for independence. The second is a career development plan, whether the contents and the durations are justified. You want to make sure that you can do what you set out to do in the number of years that you say you will, whether it's appropriate also for the stage of your traineeship. There has to be a rigorous scientifically sound and significant research plan. You should have thought about the pitfalls and alternatives. And also the research plan should empower you to develop as a successful independent researcher. Collaborators and consultants are important. You want to make sure that these are appropriately trained and capable of completing all the tasks. In case of K99, mentors are required. Again, that's one of the differences between K99 and K22 is that K22 is non-mentored. So the emphasis on a K22 would be on the collaborator and consultants, whereas mentorship would be a key aspect of the K99. The environment, does the scientific environment contribute to the probability of success? Have you described facilities to adequate detail? That will be key as well. Next slide. So research strategy, you need to address all the review criteria clearly, and you need to provide, adequate background information. These reviewers are subject matter experts, but it is important that you provide, enough level of background for them to understand what is it that you're trying to do. You want to provide a detailed technical plan on how you plan to carry out the specific aims. You want to think about the timeline and propose something that is achievable for that timeline. Do not try to do everything in a really short time frame. Preliminary data is really helpful, and so it is important that you're able to show some form of preliminary data. Your research strategy needs to have a strong scientific rationale. The other thing you want to do is you want to show reviewers that you've carefully considered all the challenges and pitfalls that may come up, and you've addressed them. explain alternative angles of attack in case your first idea may not work. And it's really important that the approach section of the research strategy is you give it enough attention. Reviewers will generally focus on that the most. Next slide. So before you submit, read the application carefully, and like I said before, address the weaknesses. Don't try to hide pitfalls. In fact, identify them and suggest how you could potentially overcome them. The other thing is, it's a really good idea to solicit feedback from others. So, try to get your peers to read them, give you feedback, ask your collaborators to read them, ask your mentors to read them, just to make sure that, they're also excited about the idea, the impact, and also the experimental approach. Next slide. Where am I going? Sorry, yeah. So check the NIH guidelines to ensure whether or not your application is considered a clinical trial. I saw this question pop up on the Q&A section, but NIH has a really nice guideline on what constitutes a clinical trial. There's even a NIH clinical trial decision tree. So use it because there are a lot of FOAs that require a clinical trial. FOA meaning funding opportunity announcement. And some don't even allow for it. So you need to be aware of the ones that do and make sure that what you propose falls within these guidelines. Finally, make sure that you're not including hyperlinks in your application. NIH has a really strict policy on hyperlinks, so you want to review them carefully prior to applying. If you don't follow these guidelines, your application may not even make it to the review stage. So it's really careful that you review them carefully so that, at the very least, you get some feedback on your application. Yeah, if you're not funded on the first try, it's important that you think about resubmissions. So this is more important for the K99. Review the summary statements, look at the written critiques, discuss the statements with NIH program official who's assigned to the grant, and address the reviewer comments on the resubmission. Do not be defensive, but be constructive, and use the introduction page to respond to reviewer critiques. And also, it's useful to talk to successful applicants and see if there are other training grants that may be a good fit for you at your career stage. Next slide. So here are some of the other funding opportunities at different stages of traineeship. We have things, starting at pre-K-12 level all the way up to senior faculty. So you may find certain opportunities that, might be a better fit for you than the K22 or the K99. And so it's always helpful to talk to program officers at the NIA. Next slide. So NIA also offers training opportunities for entrepreneurial training. So if you're a postdoc who's interested in entrepreneurship, you could think about one of these programs below. We had a K01 program that we launched last year, wherein we provided funding and support for early career scientists, including postdocs with at least 2 years of experience. The goal was to provide a protected time to carry out entrepreneurship-related activities. And we kept the meaning of entrepreneurship really broad. So if you wanted to pursue traineeship in science communications, intellectual property, regulatory affairs, it was allowed. And so, you could do any of that. You could do coursework, you could do internships at a start work, or any activities that you think might be suitable for the career that you were interested in pursuing. So we have approval for NIA leadership to offer it for a couple more years at least. We also offered an R25 program for educational institutions to offer coursework around entrepreneurship in the mission space of the NIA. And finally, we have 2 different vehicles, SBR, SATR mechanisms, which are generally used to award, for-profit startups or university-based spinouts awards for carrying out commercialization-related projects. The application is due on February 17, 2023. And so for both these awards, the idea is that the young scientists, such as yourselves, will become a PI on a grant that is awarded to a startup, and you can learn about entrepreneurship in the process. So you become a PI, you learn about entrepreneurship, and you also find yourself a mentor in that startup who's going to teach you about entrepreneurship. It provides $400,000 total cost for 1 to 2 years. And the goal is to allow for this technology or the tool or the product to be commercialized. Next slide. The last piece of advice I'll leave you with is to stay in touch with our office. Maria and Jamie are two expert training program officers. You can reach out to them at nihtraining@mail.nih.gov if you have any questions about the training opportunities. Visit our NIH training website and sign up for the newsletter so that you're informed of any new funding opportunities and announcements. Also, it's really critical that you share your feedback about today's events. This will be very helpful as we seek to do more outreach in the coming months and years. With that, Maria, Jamie, and I are happy to take any questions that you may have.
Excellent. Thank you, Saroj. We will now transition into the Q&A session. So we'll also be joined by Maria Carranza, another NIA Program Officer for Training and Career Development. If you haven't yet submitted a question, add it to the Q&A box in Zoom whenever you're ready. And if you would prefer to discuss your question with any of the NIA staff offline, you can always email niatraining@mail.nih.gov, and they can get back to you with a specific answer for your more specific question. All right, I'm going to kick it off with our first question that came in from the Q&A box. Can you clarify how tenure track equivalent is determined? Particularly for institutions or departments that may be moving away from tenure. How is that handled?
I think Maria is probably the person who handles those questions most closely in our office.
Absolutely. So the requirement for both the K99 and K22 faculty positions is that the position be tenure track or equivalent. In simple terms, that equivalency is determined on a case-by-case basis. However, a good rule of thumb is if the institution does not provide tenure to any one of their employees and not just you, then that may be considered a tenure track equivalent position. But for more specifics, we would have to examine your case, so you're welcome to contact us. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. A couple of questions about the interface with the K01. So this is a K22 and K99 R00 focused webinar, but how do these awards differ from the K01? And could you apply for a K22 and a K01 at the same time?
Great, so that's a great question. So the K01 is another one of our career development awards, and it provides the salary and a small amount of research funding for several years. And the K01, in order to hold the K01, you need to also hold a faculty position. Though importantly for the K01, it doesn't have to be a tenure track or equivalent position. So you can apply for the K01 as a postdoc or as a non-independent researcher, but by the time the award kicks in, so about 9 months after your application date, you are going to need to hold the faculty position at that point. So if you are a postdoc who maybe already has an offer letter in hand for a faculty job, or if you're in that negotiation phase, getting really close to it, the K01 can be a good choice because that is, you can activate it once you've got that faculty position. Or if you're looking at potentially getting promoted to a faculty level position within your own institution. So if they're looking to promote you to a assistant research professor or promote you to an instructor level, these types of titles, even if they are not tenure track, would satisfy that faculty level requirement for the K01.
Excellent. Do you need to be a postdoc when applying initially or during the 12-month period after receiving the letter of support?
I believe both of the K99 and K22s, they require that you're a postdoc at the time of application. So, you know, for the K99, the rule is that you have to be within the 4 years of your postdoc. For K22, we don't have that rule. So you would have to be a postdoc at the time of application.
The K22 does require 2 to 8 years of postdoctoral research. So if you're a very early stage postdoc, then the K99 is going to be a better option than the K22.
Somewhat related, will receiving the R00 end an early stage investigator status for that applicant?
No. So we invite you to explore the early stage investigator status frequently asked questions and policies on our website, but the answer is no. The R00 does not end your ESI status.
I'll throw this one over to Saroj. How much preliminary data is needed for the K22 and the research plan? Do you propose what you want to do, or do you include some of what you're finishing up as a postdoc?
Yeah, so in your research plan, given the fact that you're at that transition phase for the K22, you want to propose what you will carry out during the final year of postdoc, as well as what you plan to do. So, you do want to show that, what you are proposing has a scientific rationale. So to that point, you want to show some preliminary data that demonstrates it.
Great, that's helpful. And for that K22, how do you consider and describe the environment and facilities available for the application? It seems that would be dependent on where you end up as faculty. So, how do you handle that part of the application?
Yeah, so, for that specific part, for the K22, you focus on that, that 1 year phase wherein you talk about, the facilities that you have to carry out that transition part of the application, because you will not know what kind of educational institutions you'll be going to, for when the award kicks in.
Great. Can I apply for a K22 and a K99 for different projects on the same cycle?
That's a great question. So at the NIH, generally, there's a rule that you cannot have two applications under review at the same time if those two applications have overlapping aims. So in theory, you could submit at the same time separate a K99 and a K22. However, those projects would have to be non-overlapping. So you would really have to have two separate research projects in mind. So I think that is a pretty unusual case that somebody has two ongoing, fully developed, but also fully separate research projects. What you could instead do is do one after the other, right? So if you were to say submit your K99 first and you got back some reviews that were not great, once you receive your summary statement from reviewers, at that point, your application is no longer considered to be under review, even though NIH hasn't made a final decision at that point about whether they're going to pay or not pay your application. But since it's no longer under review, once you've gotten that summary statement, you are free to resubmit the same or very similar or overlapping aims. So at that point, you could decide to either resubmit your K99 or submit a new application as a K22 or even a K01, for instance.
Great. Can I transfer some of my K99 application package pieces like reference letters to the K22, or are the applications totally separate?
Each new application requires new submission of reference letters and letters of support. And while reference letters may be potentially the same from your referees who are not directly involved in your application, you want your letters of support to be tailored to the specific application that you're submitting them for. So please take care of that and to not make it seem like you're recycling your letters, because that would cause a not favorable impression. Thank you.
Somewhat related, can I reapply for a K22 if my K29 is not funded? Are there any limits on reapplications across the award type?
Yeah, I think Jamie kind of touched upon that. So, you could get that initial, feedback, and K99 does end at that, you are only able to apply within that 4-year time frame. So you could, take some of that learnings from reviewer feedback and then apply a fresh K22 based on that feedback you get, definitely.
Yeah, but importantly, like Saroj said, that would be a fresh or new K22 application. So it wouldn't be a resubmission, sort of in the NIH's parlance of what a resubmission is.
Great. All right, shifting gears a little bit, for the K99 and the specific K99 to promote diversity, what are the considerations you should have when selecting one of those? If you're technically eligible for the diversity award, would it be better to apply for that in all cases, or would you recommend sort of a different approach to thinking through that choice?
So you are welcome to apply to all of the funding opportunity announcements you are eligible for, and it's your choice, So definitely, please consider them. I believe that the question actually asked about the NIA ADRD K99 option, and the question also had to do about the topics. So I wanted to confirm what the person said, which is that that specific FOA is focused on drug discovery and data science. So if your research topic is not drug discovery and data science, then the parent K99 or the Mosaic K99 or some of the other options may be a better option for you just because of the research topic. We are happy to answer your questions individually if you email us to our email that was shared. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Maria. You actually got 2 questions, 1 answer. That was awesome. Are the support numbers that were shown in the presentation for per year or across all years of each stage of the award?
So those were annual per year numbers, and that's typically what you're going to see on NIA websites as well.
Great.
With the exception of the ready programs, in which case, if you're wondering about the ready ones, then those are, for the phase 1, that those are per total only.
Excellent. Okay, for the K22, will you get scored on first submission and then have an opportunity to resubmit and respond to comments similar to the K99?
So I believe resubmissions are not allowed for a K22. So you would submit another application again.
Great. Another K99 question regarding the main mentor for that. Does it need to be someone from that applicant's university, or is it possible to have a primary mentor that might not be at the current university, such as a researcher outside of the US?
Yeah, so what you're going to want to think about in that type of case is you're going to need to convince the reviewers that you'll get everything you need out of that mentor, right? That they'll really be able to be present for you and have discussions with you and guide your research in an ongoing way. So certainly the most sort of typical or traditional method is to have your primary mentor be the person in whose lab you're working as a postdoc. But I think people can be successful with other arrangements. You're just going to really want to make the argument for the reviewers that this is the right person to mentor you, and they'll be able to do that. And a really important tip there is when your mentor writes their own mentor letter as part of your application package, they should really mirror the same language that you use, right? So if you say that you're going to be meeting with them to discuss research twice a month, they should also say that they're going to be meeting with you to discuss research twice a month. So reviewers want to see that you're on board and your mentor is on board, and the two of you agree about how this relationship is going to look during your K99 phase.
Excellent. And you can have more than one mentor, is that correct, for the K99?
You can have more than one mentor, and indeed it's recommended to have more than one mentor, and to make sure that you have enough mentors to kind of cover all of the pieces of expertise that are going into your K99 project to then prepare you for the R00. However, reviewers do like to see that one mentor is really kind of primary and really thinking about your personal career development. So you do want to sort of identify who that person is and make sure that reviewers know that you've got that worked out.
Excellent. All right, shifting gears a tiny bit, going to go back to Saroj. We have some excitement around Ready and the opportunities coming out for that. Do you have any recommendations about thinking about a K22 research project that might fold into a Ready proposal later?
Sure. I mean, that might work. You could also think about, it's not, we do have approval, and, there might be the Ready K01 in the future, and that might act actually as sort of a, transitionary vehicle for you to apply to that K01 and then move that towards SBIR. But definitely you can think about, a K22, if you're thinking about sort of from a commercialization angle, definitely.
Excellent. Could you briefly describe the resubmission process? What's the limit, and is the process the same for K29 and K22? It sounds like K22 doesn't follow a resubmission. So thinking a little bit about that K99 experience once you decide to go for the resubmission.
Sure. So in terms of timeline, before you can resubmit, you do have to finish the review process. So you do have to receive your summary statement. And that typically takes about 2 review cycles. So for instance, if you submit a K99 this October, you won't have undergone review in time to resubmit this winter, but you will be able to resubmit in the summer. So the earliest you can resubmit is 2 cycles afterwards. The latest you can resubmit, there is a maximum NIH limit of 37 months between initial submission and resubmission. But in reality, most likely your real limit is that 4-year eligibility limit for the K99, right? You can resubmit one time, and the benefit of the resubmission is that reviewers are able to see the old reviews and the summary statement and what those reviewers recommended. Often it's the same or an overlapping group of reviewers from one submission to resubmission. And you're able to give this sort of 1-page response to reviewers. So that's really helpful so you can really point out exactly what you've changed to respond to those reviewer concerns. So after that one time, if your resubmission still wasn't successful and you still have time on your 4-year clock and you want to try again, you can come in with a new application at that point, but you can't do a second resubmission. So on that new application, you can take all of the knowledge and everything that you learned going through that submission process twice. However, the reviewers won't be looking at your old summary statements and you won't have that response page.
Great, thank you. Can you apply for a K99 if you're graduating in May 2023, so less than a year from now?
You are going to need to have your doctorate in hand by the time you apply for a K99. So you are going to have to wait until you get your Ph.D.
Great. All right. In terms of eligibility, specifically for the child extension, are there multiples of that extension? If you have 2 babies during your postdoc time, are there 2 extensions possible, or is it limited to 1?
So for the K99, you can only get 1 childbirth extension, which is a full 12 months, a full year. However, for your ESI, your early stage investigator status, which is something completely different that does not apply to the K99, in that case, you actually get an extension for each child. So we encourage you to look at those guidelines and to make sure that your early stage investigator status is up to date. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Maria. One slight add-on to that, for the documentation and the letter for that, do they happen with the application or after the applicant is successful?
Correct. And you mean for the childbirth extensions. Yes. So the funding opportunity announcement recommends applicants to contact us at least 12 weeks before your submission so that we are able to provide you with that letter and you are able to attach it to your cover letter on your application. So please contact us as early as possible if you require an extension letter so that we can provide it. Thank you.
Right. My position, not mine. This person's position title is research assistant professor, but it is not independent. And they have confirmed eligibility for the K99. Would that also make them eligible for a K22?
The answer will be yes, but in both cases, the K99 and the K22, it is incumbent upon you as a candidate to include in your application evidence that your position is not independent, and that evidence is usually a position description from your institution that denotes this position as non-independent research-wise. So please include that in your application to dispel any doubts that may come from your position title. It's all about the position description. Thank you.
And just to confirm, does the faculty position need to be tenure track, or is research track also acceptable based on that position description and the specifics within?
So the R00 faculty position and the K22 faculty position must be tenure track or equivalent. However, for a K01, you could have a research faculty position that does not necessarily have to be tenure track. Thank you.
Okay. Do K22 applications go through your postdoc institution's Office of Sponsored Programs?
Yes, they do. Since you haven't identified your K22 faculty position yet, you should submit it from your current postdoctoral position.
Excellent. Okay, another timing question. If I'll hit the 2-year mark of my postdoc in January 2023, am I eligible to submit for the October 2022 cycle, or do I need to wait for the February 2023 submission after that 2-mark postdoc milestone has been met?
So for the K22, that's the one that requires you to be in that window between 2 and 8 years. So for the K22, you're going to need to wait until you hit your 2-year mark to submit that application. For the K99, you can be from 0 to 4 years. So that one is open.
Okay. Do we have any general stats around the K99 and the K22 in terms of applications and acceptance rates? How many applications we tend to see per cycle, average number of awards per cycle, anything like that to give a little bit of color to the numbers?
Sure. So career development or K award success rates are publicly available on the NIH Reporter, and we can share the link to that site on the chat for you to check out. And there it is. Jamie just put it. Thank you.
Another good question on the childbirth extension. Are males, I imagine fathers, but could also be another situation, are they considered eligible for that extension on the K99?
The answer is yes. Please contact us with the details and we'll be happy to provide that letter.
Excellent. All right. I think I'm coming to the end of my questions here. Does the financial status of your primary mentor matter when you're applying for the K99? For example, do they need to have an active R01 grant?
So there are no specific requirements for how well funded your K99 mentor should be. However, reviewers are going to want to see that you're in a position that is supported, that's not sort of a tenuous research position. So it does matter to be in a, I guess, a comfortable research environment.
That is correct, but that funding could be private funding as well, other federal agencies. It doesn't have to be NIH, and there is no specific number of research grants that your mentor needs to have.
Great. In terms of the non-resubmission for K22s, do you still receive a summary statement with comments on that submission to potentially improve a new submission down the line?
Yes, you do, and you can use that for you can submit it as a new application using those those reviewer feedback if you're within the 2 to 8 year timeline.
Great. For that K22, are there any maximum number of letters from collaborators and other letters of recommendation that you can submit with that application?
I don't believe there's any maximum. I mean, you do want to make sure you want your letters to be relevant, right? And especially for those collaborators, you do want them to be folks who are truly working with you or truly providing, data, resources, equipment, et cetera.
Let's see. I'm just making sure we've caught everybody. The primary mentor can be from another university and even from outside the US, as long as they have an established and clear relationship, mentor and mentee, that you can demonstrate in the application. Got that one?
Yes, and I do think in those cases, it's probably beneficial to also have a secondary mentor who's at your own institution, who you'll be able to access with ease. Right?
Okay. Well, I think we have come to everything on our list that isn't super specific to anybody, which is helpful for the large group. We somehow have 4 minutes left. So just in case, if you're here, you've got a question in your head, please feel free to throw it in the Q&A. But I'll give Saroj and Jamie a chance to note anything from the questions or just anything in general from today that you feel like that's the main point or two that you would really leave people with. I can tell you one is going to be contact NIA training at mail.nih.gov, where this team is here to help you and make sure that you are as successful as you can be in this process. We know that NIH funding is not the simplest and clearest thing to achieve, and it takes real work and effort, but it is very valuable. The work to get it as well as the work funded by it are both very valuable. So definitely reach out to this team if you have any questions about your application. Hopefully do it with a good amount of time so that this team can also provide you with that strong support. Saroj, Jamie, anything, and Maria, anything that you would particularly like to leave the group with today, top of mind?
I think you covered it. We're here and start early. Those are the biggest answers.
All right. I'm going to take a quick look here. Here's another couple of questions. We'll just hit a couple of these. How do you decide between an R21 or a K22? We haven't hit that particular award type combo yet.
That would entirely depend on your career goals. If what you're looking is to transition into a faculty position from a postdoc, then the K22 is certainly your choice if you're within the eligibility window. The R21 is a research project grant, so you would have to confirm with your institution that they are willing to support you in applying and managing that grant if it were awarded. But it does not necessarily require a faculty position. It does require institutional support. So you'd be welcome to check with your Office of Sponsor Research on that. Thank you.
And since it is a research award, the R21 is not limited to U.S. citizens or permanent residents. So if you're outside of your K99 4-year window and you're not a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, the K22 is not an option for you, and nor is the K01. So at that point, you might want to think about the R21 or the R03, which is another small exploratory research grant.
Excellent. It sounds like since the K22 doesn't have a resubmission, what you learn from that, if you have an unsuccessful first submission, is really just to go with a new application and learn from the feedback from the reviewers. Is there really any difference between that and the resubmission process that happens on the K99? Or is it basically 6 of one and half a dozen of the other?
So I think it is very valuable in your resubmission to have this introductory level or letter where you're directly responding to the reviewer's concerns. You're able to really kind of connect the dots to the reviewers and say, okay, here's what you didn't like before, here's what you asked me to change, here's how I fixed it, right? And you can imagine that if you're able to really demonstrate to reviewers that you fixed everything that they asked for, then they tend to be sort of positively inclined towards your application. So when you're coming in with a K22 and a new submission, you use that advice just to make your application better, but you don't have that opportunity to like really directly connect the dots for the reviewers.
Excellent. Well, I'll throw one last question in here. If August marks 3 years of postdoctoral training, do you have an opportunity for a K99 resubmission for an application made in February, or should they go with the October cycle to have room for resubmission?
Yeah, I think I'm doing the math right, that you're going to need to hit that October cycle, which will give you a time to reapply next June or July if necessary, before your eligibility runs out next August. If you waited to submit your first submission until February, you wouldn't be able to get in any potential resubmission until next October. it's always, your resubmission is always 2 cycles behind the initial.
Great. Okay, well, it is 2:01, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. If your question was not anonymous and we did not get to it, but you did submit it, we have a record of that, and we will plan to follow up with you to make sure that you have everything you need. But for now, I'm going to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope that you found this educational and enjoyable, and we really hope that you fill out our post-event questionnaire. The link was shared in the chat. You'll also get a follow-up email from us. Please give us your feedback and help us learn what worked well for you and what you'd like to see improve for future events. We really look forward to seeing and looking through your feedback. If you were not able to share a question today, or you would really prefer to talk offline, please email nia@mail.nih.gov and the team will get back to you and make sure you have what you need. And you can also sign up for our newsletter. That link is also shared in the chat, and it'll be in our follow-up email. You'll get all of our proactive updates straight to your inbox. All right, have a wonderful day, everyone, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.